What's up guys, welcome back to another video on the channel, and today's a very special day. It is draft day, and you all know what that means. It's time for my final NBA mock draft on the day where we'll see what really happens. You guys have showed so much love to the draft content, it is only right that we go out with a bang. So in this mock draft, not only are we going to be doing the typical picks and analysis as usual, we're going to be including trades as well, and I promise you guys, this is going to be a good one, so stick around. Alright, that's enough of the intro. You guys know the drill. Let's get straight into it with the Atlanta Hawks on the clock at number 1 overall. With the first overall pick, the Atlanta Hawks select Zachary RISERS out of JL Borg. There's a lot of thought going into this pick, and it's not a clear consensus like years past, but to me, I think the selection has to be Zachary RISERS. You could of course consider a guy like Alex Sarr, but based on what we've seen, it doesn't seem like the Hawks are going to go that direction, and if I'm Atlanta, I want a well-rounded forward who just knows how to put the ball in the hoop. This guy has the fundamentals to be an elite scorer in the NBA, not to mention he has the size to be a threat on the defensive end as well. I understand the fit is a little bit wishy-washy, especially with Jalen Johnson stepping into his own last year, but when it comes to pure talent, I think RISERS and Sarr are in a league of their own, and if Sarr's not going to be your guy, you got to go with Zach at number 1 overall. At number 2, I have the Washington Wizards selecting Alex Sarr, the big man out of Perth. Alex Sarr just seems like the big that the Wizards are looking for. He is incredibly athletic, he is smooth with the ball in his hands, and most importantly, he has elite defensive timing, which is going to translate to the NBA very smoothly. Now, although Sarr is very smooth with the ball in his hands, he is not the most consistent. He knocks down that mid-range jumper very well. He can finish around the rim, but you'd like to see him do it a little bit more consistently for a guy of his size, and his three-point shot really isn't all the way there. If he can develop his offensive skill set to be elite, he's obviously going to be the best player in this class. That's just going to take time. Luckily for the Wizards, they have all the time in the world in this rebuild, and if a guy like Alex Sarr can reach his full potential, we know he's going to be a star. At number 3, I have the Houston Rockets selecting Donovan Clingan out of UConn. Now, this is a really hard pick for Houston, I can't lie. I'm a big fan of Alperen Sengun. He's going to be the face of that franchise going forward, and the last thing you want to do is select a guy that competes with him and puts him out of his rhythm. I don't think Donovan Clingan has to be that big man, though. Where Sengun excels with his back-to-the-basket IQ as well as his offensive intangibles, I think Donovan Clingan is actually the perfect pairing with his incredible defense and his athleticism down low. I know Houston is considering trading this pick for a bigger star, and I think that's definitely on the table here, but assuming they stick it out at the number 3 spot, I don't see why Clingan wouldn't be the guy. Again, I know you already have your franchise center, but you trust these guys to actually work with each other, and hey, if they can develop, be one of the most dynamic front courts in the entire NBA. Clingan has great value, somebody's going to take him early, and if it's the Rockets, I don't think that's a bad move. At number 4, things are going to shake up tremendously as we have our first trade of the mock. Hey, and this one is no soft trade. We're going all the way, as I have the New Orleans Pelicans moving up to number 4 in a trade revolving around Brandon Ingram. The Pelicans receive pick number 4, Keldon Johnson, a 2025 first rounder from Chicago, a 2026 first rounder, a 2028 first rounder from Boston, and a 2024 second rounder, while the Spurs get Brandon Ingram. Thinking about this move from the Spurs perspective, you got to get some scoring around Victor Wembanyama, and although I know he is very, very young, only going into his sophomore season, his timeline is accelerating quickly. You want a team that can compete around Wembanyama as soon as possible, and with Brandon Ingram's elite scoring and him still being quite young, I think that's a no-brainer move for the Spurs. For the Pelicans, it seems like we're at the point where you're going to have to get rid of Brandon Ingram anyways. He and Zion are not the duo that you expected them to be, but he is still a young player with incredible value. Getting the 4th pick in this draft, a guy like Keldon Johnson, who's probably going to start right away, 3 extra first rounders, 1 from Chicago that can be incredibly valuable, and a second rounder to throw in the mix as well. I think that's about as good a package as you're going to get, and not to mention, sending him out to San Antonio isn't necessarily a move that's going to make them a contender right away, so that 2025 first round pick you get from them could still be quite high, along with that one from Chicago that I mentioned. So with that trade out of the way, the Pelicans are now on the clock at 4, and I have them going with a very interesting prospect, Stephon Castle. Stephon Castle is officially my point guard one in this class. There's just something about the way he plays the game that makes me know he's going to transition to the NBA level absolutely as smooth as possible. This guy is just a born playmaker. It feels like he's always setting up his teammates, making the right play, and for a young guy, especially last year on a UConn team that went all the way, his IQ was on full display. With Castle's elite athleticism and his very smart defense as well, I think he's the all-around point guard that New Orleans has been looking for and will jolt them into a new era of their rebuild where Castle and Zion can actually be an electric duo, assuming he can stay on the court. He, of course, referring to Zion because Castle's been healthy so far. The only thing with Castle that you do worry about is his long-term shooting potential. This guy is not going to knock your socks off with his deep range, but he has great fundamentals and he knocks them down at a high enough clip where I'm not worried about it. The Pelicans make a ginormous move in this spot, changing the trajectory of their franchise, but bringing in Stephon Castle is absolutely the best you're going to get at this point. At number 5, I have the Detroit Pistons, and I have them selecting Matas Buzeles out of the G League Ignite. I've talked about Matas all year, and he actually just said it himself in a recent interview. If this guy shot better this year, he would easily be the number 1 pick. I know a lot of prospects would say that, hey, maybe if Zach Edey shot better, he'd be the number 1 pick, but for Matas, you really have to see it to believe it. We know Buzeles can shoot, and that's what made him the super well-rounded prospect we thought he was going to be, because this guy is great off the ball making plays for himself. I think he's super underrated in transition, and at a 6'10 frame, this guy can logistically play the 2 through the 4. For the Ignite, it's not what we wanted to see. His fundamentals were still there, but he wasn't knocking down shots, and on defense, he looked solid, but the effort just wasn't fully there all the time. With that being said, Detroit got knocked down to the 5th pick after being one of the worst teams in NBA history this year. If they have a shot to take a guy that arguably could be the best player in the class, I think they have to do it. Not to mention, I think the Pistons have a couple open spots at the forward position. I think Matas fits in right away and could easily start, so I think the value at pick number 5 is immense. At number 6, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting Reed Sheppard out of Kentucky. The Hornets are in a tough spot. They obviously have to build around LaMelo. He's supposed to be their franchise guy, but they don't really have the pieces around him to contend. I think Reed Sheppard could be the perfect role player to put next to a guy like LaMelo Ball. And it's not a knock on Reed if I call him a role player. I think he's going to be one of those guys where maybe not on the defensive end as strong, but a guy like Derek White, one of those elite role players that contending teams always need to have. Reed is arguably the best pure shooter in this class, and when he has the ball in his hands, he was one of the most elite players in the pick and roll that we've seen in college basketball in a long time. He has a versatile skill set. He also really shined at defense at Kentucky, but that's also not saying too much considering Kentucky's defense was horrible, and he looked like one of the only people that was trying out there at times. Again, I do like Reed Sheppard. I'm not as high on him as most, but in Charlotte, where he doesn't have to take on a role of being a star on a team or even really being that primary ball handler all the time, I think he'll slide in great, and honestly, he's a guy that could put up a high clip of points right off the rip. At number 7, I have the Portland Trailblazers selecting Ron Hollins from the G League Ignite. Ron Holland is a super interesting player, and the thing that's going to stand out from him is his athleticism. If you pair him up with a guy like Scoot Henderson, that fast break is going to be elite, because if you throw anything in Ron Holland's zip code, that dude's going to bring it down. But that's not it. I think Ron Holland is actually going to be a really good shooter in the NBA. I love his form. I love his ability to create shots for himself. He just has to want to do it more consistently so teams don't just sag off him, because of course driving is going to be his first threat. I think with Jeremy Grant probably not being the long-term answer in Portland, Ron Holland can fit into his spot really well, and what he may lack in shooting compared to a guy like Jeremy Grant, he absolutely makes up for in tenacity and honestly long-term potential on the defensive end. At number 8, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting Rob Dillingham out of Kentucky. The Spurs might have made it out of this class better than anyone else, and I know not everyone is in love with Rob Dillingham, but there's no denying that he's the most electric point guard in this class, and if you want a pure scorer at the 1 spot, that's who you're going to get if you take Rob. Rob is also a very talented playmaker as well. The flaws with him are obvious though. He's incredibly skinny, he's not a good defender, and you don't really know if he's going to be able to finish around the rim at the NBA the way he kind of was able to pull off at Kentucky. With that being said, for every question mark about Rob Dillingham, there's an exclamation mark of all the amazing things that he does on the court. I'm a big fan of his. There's probably going to be teams that pass up on him for his size alone, but San Antonio, after you make a huge trade in this mock to get Brandon Ingram, getting a guy like Rob Dillingham who has top 5 potential talent is absolutely huge for the Spurs. But just when you thought all was chalk, there is another trade to announce in my mock draft. The Oklahoma City Thunder are actually moving up with the Memphis Grizzlies. The Thunder are going to receive pick 9 right here, and Memphis is going to move down to pick 12 and pick up Kenrich Williams as well. Hear me out on this one. I'm sure the first thought that you have in your head is, why is Memphis doing this move? I mean, Kenrich Williams is not an elite talent or anything, but I think the gap in moving down 3 picks right here is really not that big, and Kenrich Williams will probably be an impact player off the Grizzlies bench right away. I also think that whoever the Grizzlies are going to take at 12, you will see very soon, would be there at 9, might be there at 15. I think there's a guy there that really fits their team that they could wait on and move back a couple spots. For OKC, I think they just know who they want, and if they have to trade up a couple picks to get him, if they have to trade a guy like Kenrich Williams who they like to get him, I think they're going to do so, and that's why they're on the clock right here. With the 9th overall pick in my mock draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Cody Williams out of Colorado. I mean, the story writes itself here, guys. The brother of Jalen Williams, the co-star of the Thunder, is available at pick number 9, and he actually fills in a position of need. Guys, how am I not going to do that? That's the perfect mock. But enough of the narratives, let's actually talk about the skill of Cody Williams here. This guy was on one shooting this year. He fell off towards March Madness, but from deep, this guy was unstoppable. And my favorite part of his game is his finishing ability around the rim. He is not some high flyer. He doesn't really have an insane dunk package, but this dude throws up crazy looking layups that just always find their way to the bottom of the net. He is a pure 3-level scorer, and I think that's going to translate to the league very well. The problem with Cody is that he's a bit of a tweener. He's definitely too slow on the perimeter to guard a 2 guard. He's definitely not strong enough to guard a 4 guard in the post. And if you're strictly in the 3 spot in the modern positionless NBA, it definitely puts you in a bit of a bubble. So, well, yes, Cody Williams is not going to be a great defender in the league right away. And, well, yes, he is a streaky shooter as well. I think he would fit on this Thunder team so well. And even if he's coming off the bench, he can absolutely expand on the role of what a guy like Ousmane Dieng does, and who knows, he might actually develop into something special alongside his brother. At number 10, I have the Utah Jazz selecting Dalton Knecht out of Tennessee. The Jazz have been very meticulous in the last couple of draft classes, finding guys that are going a bit under the radar, guys that they're confident they can develop in their system. And while that is an incredible strategy, Dalton Knecht is just simple. This guy can hoop. Offensively, Dalton Knecht is the most well-rounded player in this entire class, and there's absolutely no debate on that. This guy can score all 3 levels. He was one of the best deep shooters in college basketball this year. He's absolutely thunderous around the rim. There is no stopping him, and his mid-range game is really smooth. He has a tight handle. He goes into his mid-range shots with incredible footwork. I mean, I could talk all day about this guy. He's one of the best offensive players I've seen as a prospect in a while. I think you can guess what the downside is. This guy's defense is not all there. And on a Tennessee team whose defense was top 5 in the country, he often was the weak link. I also think you have to point out his age. He's one of the older prospects in this class, and he probably doesn't have that very peak high-term potential, which is what holds him back from being a top 3 sort of guy. Especially with Jordan Clarkson coming off one of his worst years in a while, I think they just need backcourt scoring in Utah, and I can promise you that Dalton Knecht is going to provide that. He's not going to take up any point guard minutes from a guy like Keontae George. He's definitely the guy that operates off the ball, and he's just going to put the ball in the hoop. I think Utah fans could be very happy about this pick, and again, although he is not that sort of project player that you like to develop out there, he's a guy that's actually going to give you important minutes, and that says a lot about this Jazz squad. At number 11, I have the Chicago Bulls selecting Tajon Salon out of Cholet. Salon is kind of just like a ball of clay. I mean, he can shoot. He actually has some really solid dribble packages, and with his athleticism and his length, he's going to be able to play some defense as well, at the very least rack up deflections. I don't need to explain this too deeply, he's just super raw. He was definitely a role player out in Cholet. He didn't really get to shine as a primary option, and throughout the season, he was kind of just putting the pieces together and becoming a more complete player. For Chicago, a team that just traded away Caruso, you're clearly going through a rebuild. I can't promise you that Levine, DeRozan, or Vucevic are going to be on this roster on the first game. There's so much change going on. You have the time to develop a guy like Salon. After Chicago failed the development of Patrick Williams, I think Salon is their chance to get a second shot at it. I think they play very similar roles. I do think Salon has higher end potential going towards the end of his career, especially considering that I think his shooting is always going to be a little bit more consistent than a guy like Williams. But what Chicago can do this time is not put expectations of winning on their players. They don't have to put the expectation for a guy like Salon to even shoot efficiently. They just need to give him space on the court and let him figure out what he's going to be able to do in the NBA. I think Salon is a huge project player, but with the potential you get from a guy like him, and again, with the low expectations Chicago's going to have, I think it's going to be a match made in heaven if they go this route. At number 12, the Grizzlies are on the clock. They moved down, and I think you guys are going to see why I moved them down a couple spots. I'm taking Zach Edey out of Purdue. Now, if you guys are fans of the channel, you see my draft process stuff, I'm not a Zach Edey fan. This is not me projecting that he's going to be some stud, but geez, the fit in Memphis just makes way too much sense to me. I mean, with Ja Morant being such a high-flying point guard, with Desmond Bane being an elite shooting guard, and with Jaren Jackson Jr. being one of the better defensive players in the entire league at the 4, I think putting a brick wall with Zach Edey in the center of that team is just going to be electric. I mean, believe me, I get that this guy is never going to space the floor. I get that you can't look at him to be an offensive hub at the professional level like they did at Purdue, but I don't know how you're going to get a bucket on a combination of Jaren Jackson and Zach Edey. You're not getting a shot off. So, well, yes, he is going to clog the spacing. Well, yes, as I mentioned, I don't expect this guy to be putting up high scoring efforts. It just makes too much sense. What Steven Adams was doing in Memphis actually made a lot of sense to me, and I think trading him, while it makes sense at the time, especially due to contract reasons, I don't think that's going to age super well for Memphis unless they get a guy like Zach Edey to replace him and build on what that role was, which was being that elite big man defender that highlights the versatility of a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. So Grizzlies fans, I completely understand if you think this is a reach. I myself do quite a bit as well, but I think the fit is so good, and once you start falling down past this spot, let's say you traded down to the 20 range, there's no promises that another team like Toronto or even LA wouldn't think like you did. So you got to stay in front of teams like that. I let you guys trade down a little bit too, so I hope you guys understand. I just think the fit for Edey is amazing. Alright, 13 with the Kings, let's keep it very simple. I have him taking Nikola Topic. I understand Topic is a pure point guard, believe me, he is a pure point guard. This guy play makes like no other, and while he is not a shooter, he has the ability to get to the lane and finish these absolutely ridiculous looks, and he's always making plays for others. I think his defense is solid. He can get a little handsy at times. He racks up a lot of fouls occasionally, but I think he has really active hands and he sticks in the passing lane. So on both sides of the ball, you know what you're going to get from Topic. I'm not someone that buys his long-term potential as a star point guard, but that's actually why I think Sacramento makes more sense. If they bring him off the bench, especially in his rookie year, maybe even his second year as well, and let him just run a bench unit in the NBA, I think he's going to make a lot of mistakes, but I also think he's going to iron out some of his flaws and honestly just become a more well-rounded player. I think he needs that freedom, kind of like a guy like Salon I mentioned earlier. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox is your guy. I understand that they could use a 2-guard as well, but the talent of Topic at this spot and the ability to have him be such a strong player off the bench, especially if he comes off the bench with a guy like Malik Monk, that's value that I'm not passing up if I'm Sacramento, and it actually shifts your team a little bit in a new direction if the future with De'Aaron Fox ever looks a little bit shaky. At number 14, I have the Portland Trail Blazers selecting Devin Carter out of Providence. We found out from a report from Woj that Devin Carter was promised to be selected in the lottery by one of these lottery squads. And maybe I'm reaching a little bit too much having him this late in the lottery, but I can see why a team would make that promise to a guy like Carter. While on the older side and while coming onto the draft scene a little bit late, this guy is just such a well-rounded player. On the offensive end, he is that true point guard that runs the pick and roll, has incredibly high basketball IQ, and defense is where he shines, as he was one of the best defensive players in all of college basketball last year as a true point guard. That doesn't happen quite often. Carter can shoot the rock, but he couldn't throughout his entire college career, so you do have to worry a little bit about if that's a fluke or if that's genuine development. I think some NBA teams will have that question. And again, as a 21-year-old point guard coming out of the class, a guy that doesn't necessarily have elite separation, especially if he's not in the pick and roll game, I don't think you're ever going to see him as that number one go-to guy on offense, but he just has all the fundamentals, all the intangibles that you look for a guard. And for Portland, especially after taking a pick earlier and a guy like Ron Holland who could serve to be kind of risky, I think Devin Carter is a super safe selection and a guy that you're ready to play from day one. At number 15, I have the Miami Heat selecting Isaiah Collier out of USC. There was one point in this draft process where Isaiah Collier was the number one player on the board. Let that sink in. And not to mention, his year at USC really wasn't that bad. He struggled with injuries. He didn't shoot amazing at first, but when you look at the end of the year stats, especially when you look at those last 10 games or so, the way that he ended the year, Isaiah Collier was really, really good. You worry about the shooting for him. He's definitely one of those point guards more in a Russell Westbrook mold where he's just going to absolutely head to the rim every time. He's explosive. He's great with the ball in his hands, but he's one of those guys that doesn't shoot too great. He's a little risky with it sometimes, and the intensity isn't always matched on defense. With that being said, this guy is really, really explosive, and his efficiency in the mid-range and, of course, around the rim are solid enough where I don't worry too much about the three-point shooting, especially because, the three-point shooting wasn't horrible either. Miami's in a weird spot because obviously they're a playoff level team, but they could use a bunch more guys, especially off their bench. I don't think they have a true backup point guard, and I think Isaiah Collier offers something that nobody else on their roster really has. I think you guys know what time it is. We have another trade to announce. This one involves the Philadelphia 76ers, of course, and the Utah Jazz. In this trade, Utah is going to move up to this pick, number 16, and also pick up B-Ball Paul Reed. What does Philly receive? They go down to pick 29, they stay in the first round of this class, and they take on Jordan Clarkson as well. For Philly, this makes sense. Whoever you were going to select at 16 probably doesn't give you an immediate use on a team that's trying to contend while Joel Embiid is still on the court. You don't need that pick. And Jordan Clarkson is an elite scorer that you can confidently bring off your bench, and he also leaves room for you to sign a max player. His contract works perfectly where you can bring him in and still get a guy on the max. For Utah, you get to move up. You get more of a premier selection. That late first rounder probably wasn't going to do you any good. You bring in B-Ball Paul, who probably isn't going to make a big impact, but it's another name in the front court that I think could be useful at some point. And moving on from Jordan Clarkson is sad. At this point, he's almost somewhat of a franchise legend in the modern Jazz era. Maybe a stretch, but this guy's been real good for the Jazz for a couple of years now. And of course, you have to move on from him, but he's coming off his worst season. I gave you guys Dalton Knecht earlier, who kind of picks up that role. So I don't necessarily think he serves an impact for you either. I think you move on from Clarkson, who you probably would have had to move on from some point at anyways, and you get a better pick. At number 16, I have the Utah Jazz selecting Jacoby Walter out of Baylor. I'm giving the Jazz another guard who could play small forward, and this one is also an elite shooter. I think he and Knecht do have some key differences, though. I think where Knecht excels driving to the lane, I think Jacoby Walter could work on that a little bit, but where Dalton Knecht struggles on defense, Jacoby Walter is one of the best in the entire class. This guy has active hands. This guy has a great build to be a solid defender in the NBA, and overall, this guy is just strong at both ends. So while he doesn't have that top tier offensive potential like Knecht does earlier, this guy gives you a lot more on defense, and it gives you kind of a more fun developmental guy to a certain extent because he's a lot younger than Knecht. I keep bringing up Knecht because if Utah hops out of this draft class going into a season where they played really horribly last year and they see that they got Knecht and Walter, two guys that are borderline top 10 talents, I think you are very, very happy as a Jazz fan. At number 17, I have the Los Angeles Lakers selecting Jared McCain out of Duke. Jared McCain just makes a lot of sense in LA. With JJ Redick on the squad as the new head coach, no matter how you feel about that, we know how he liked to play ball, and I think that's the way that Jared McCain kind of likes to play ball as well. When you talk about a guy that uses screens on the offensive end, a guy who loves to set his feet and take shots no matter how deep they are, and a guy you trust down the stretch even as more of a role player to hit big shots when they matter, I think that screams Jared McCain. There are a lot of flashy options that the Lakers could do at 17 that probably don't really benefit the sake of the team. I think Jared McCain is a guy that actually would fit incredibly well and is going to give you immediate impact. He's a great fit. I don't see why LA wouldn't do it if he's somehow still on the board at 17. At number 18, I have the Orlando Magic selecting Kaishan George out of Miami. This one's really simple to me. Kaishan Jones has a flamethrower. This guy is super tall as well. He's just kind of the mold that you want a shooting guard to be in the modern NBA. He could really be something special, especially in that offensive end. The defense is there as well. The thing with Kaishan is he kind of just got outshined by a guy like Wooga Poplar or Nigel Pack until the last 10 games of the season or so. So while it took Kaishan some time to kind of find his own way in college basketball, I do think he has elite high potential, and not to mention, we saw the Magic in the playoffs. They need offense no matter what. If Kaishan George can be a spark plug, I think you go for it. At number 20, I have the Cleveland Cavaliers selecting Carlton Carrington out of Pitt. The Cavs have a lot going on right now out of their core four. We don't really know who's going to stay. I think no matter who stays, Carlton Carrington makes a lot of sense as a bench scorer. A lot of people compare a guy like Rob Dillingham to a Jamal Crawford or a Bones Highland. I think Carlton Carrington is more of that guy, which that's not an insult. Being a spark plug off the bench is huge, especially in the modern NBA. Carlton can score at will. He's a bit skinnier. He's not a plus defender, but I think in Cleveland, that fit would be really nice. At number 21, I'm going to give the Pelicans Kel'el Ware out of Indiana. We saw that Kel'el Ware can hoop. He's really good at finishing around the rim. He has a knack for blocking shots, and overall, he's not necessarily that stretch big that you look for in the modern day, but he's just a well-rounded center that could crack a rotation on really any of these teams. We just saw that he kind of has attitude problems, and that shouldn't hold you back this far, but he's not as elite of a talent as some of these other guys up the board, so it's definitely held him back than most would expect. With that being said, I can't speak on the person Kel'el Ware is. For all I know, he's a super nice guy, and I think he's probably matured at Indiana a little bit. I think he still has kind of a singular offensive skill set. He's never going to really stretch the floor, but for a guy that athletic, that young, with that high defensive potential, if a team like New Orleans, who probably isn't going to hold on to Jonas Valanciunas forever, sees him as a potential long-term center option, I don't see why you wouldn't do it. Alright guys, I got one more trade in this video. This one is very simple. The Suns are going to trade out of their pick because they always do. I have the Suns trading pick number 22 to the Sacramento Kings in order to acquire Davion Mitchell. To make the salaries match in that trade, they will be trading Nasir Little as well. For the Kings, I mean, this is pretty simple. If you ask a Kings fan, Davion Mitchell was arguably their least valuable player last year. His offense has not come along, and after I gave him Topic earlier, they do not need another point guard. It makes a lot of sense. For the Suns, I mean, you're still trying to compete, so I don't see why you would make this pick. James Jones has said it himself. He doesn't really believe in drafting players in the first place, so there's no one at 22 that's going to knock your socks off. Davion Mitchell, on the other hand, although, as I mentioned, his offense is not coming along, that elite defensive potential you see from a guy like him, the athleticism, and honestly, just the fact that he's ready to play right away, strikes me as a reason the Suns might want to go after him. At number 22, I have the Sacramento Kings selecting Tyler Smith out of the G League Ignite. This one is just based off the potential. This is a guy that could have gone a lot earlier, but he kind of doesn't take the best shots. He didn't have the most efficient year in the G League, and his defense has a long way to go. With that being said, he is 6'11". He's arguably a small forward. He can shoot from deep. He has a mid-range game. There's a lot to like about this guy. There's just a lot of work you're going to have to put into it as well. With pick number 22, maybe this is a guy that they can stock in Stockton in the G League and let him develop there because I think he has the tools to be elite. He's just not particularly close yet. At number 23, I have the Bucks selecting Kyle Filipowski out of Duke. This one is simple. With Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez both looking like they might have to be on the way out from Milwaukee to keep that big three that they have, I think they're going to need to have trust in their young forwards eventually. I don't really think they have great ones. I think Kyle Filipowski is about as solid as you're going to get. Filipowski is just an all-around talent. I was really impressed with his shooting deep into Duke's run. I was impressed with his ball handling all year. He can finish below the rim. He can finish from the mid-range. He just doesn't do any of those things super elite. He's just kind of all right at all of them. In the NBA, I'm really interested to see how Filipowski's defense will come around because I don't trust him to guard perimeter players on the wing. I think he's a little too slow for that, and he's definitely not big or strong enough to guard pure centers down low. So I'm really interested to see how his game progresses that way, but at the same time, I'm confident it will. So while Filipowski is not a flashy pick by any means, I don't think he's a high potential pick. I think he's a guy who's going to be ready to play right away. And if someone has to fill in that Bobby Portis role on short notice, Filipowski is probably the best option you have. Alright, the Knicks pick back-to-back at 24 and 25, so let's wrap it all in one. I have him taking Yves Missi out of Baylor, the big man, and I have him taking the shooting guard Johnny Furphy out of Kansas. This video is being recorded the night before the draft, and already everything feels like it's shaking up for New York. At the current moment, they just traded for Mikal Bridges, but they still have pick number 24 and 25, so we're going to roll on that assumption. Getting 2 back-to-back picks is a luxury, and I'm going to make the most of it, selecting 2 entirely different players. Let's start with Messi first. I do the Messi Clint Capella comparison all the time, but to me it's just spot on. A guy who's electrifying on offense, not for being a pure scorer, but just an amazing lob threat, and a guy on defense who's gonna go up and block your shot. This guy is just high energy on both ends, and although he's not necessarily a versatile player, he does a couple things incredibly well, and for the Knicks, who have kind of been center chasing the last couple of years, I think if Hartenstein's on the way out, he kind of provides a game that could be similar to his, especially with that defensive intensity. For Furphy, I mean, he's the Kansas shooting guard. This dude can just shoot that thing from anywhere. He is really slim. I don't really see him as the same level as prospect as I saw with Grady Dick last year. I don't think he's that good yet, but we saw he has that strap on him. And again, the footwork is incredible. I do like his defense to a certain extent. It's just more going to be about if he has any self-creation or if he's going to have to be one of those guys that strictly comes off screens. If Furphy can create for himself, that makes him a really versatile player. If he's a guy that's just going to be stepping into shots, he's kind of just Duncan Robinson, but that's not horrible value this low. Number 26 is the Washington Wizards. I'm giving him AJ Mitchell out of UCSB. AJ Mitchell is a super fun player, one of my favorites in the class. He has incredible self-creation, he's super smart with the ball in his hands, and with his ginormous frame, this guy's going to lock you up on defense. The only thing with Mitchell is his shooting, and it's not the typical shooting problems. This guy has good efficiency from almost anywhere on the court. He can finish around the rim. I like his mid-range. He can decently shoot from deep. It's just the consistency. He really doesn't have good fundamentals, but I think he rose his stock at the NBA Draft Combine, where he shot well in the drills, and in the 5v5 section, he was absolutely incredible. Mitchell's a baller in my eyes. I know when you hear bad shooting fundamentals and you hear Washington Wizards draft pick, after the Johnny Davis situation, I get why Wizards fans might be scared, but especially considering he's a lower risk, much farther down the board than Johnny Davis was, I think you take a shot at Mitchell because I think he has more of the tools around him to make him a solid player in the NBA. There's definitely some work that has to be done there. I think you need to drill down what he's actually going to do in the NBA so you avoid him being a Killian Hayes of some sorts, but with his size, with his athleticism, I think you take a shot at it. At number 27, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting Terrence Shannon out of Illinois. This guy is just a hooper, and now that the off-the-court stuff is settled, we can really just focus on that. This guy is a 3-level scorer. He's kind of up there with a guy like Connect for being one of the better ones in the class, and especially his shooting came along this year at Illinois. He could always finish. He was also always creative with the ball in his hands, but he never really shot the 3 at Texas Tech like you wanted him to. At Illinois this year, that completely changed. The knack on him is his age. I don't think he has a lot of room to develop, and after coming off what's probably one of his best seasons he's ever going to have as a basketball player, I wonder what his full growth is actually going to look like, and if it's really going to be that much higher of a ceiling. With that out of the way, though, I think Minnesota just needs hoopers, especially if they really think that they're a team that can be contending for a title. Terrence Shannon is one of those guys. At number 28, I have the Denver Nuggets selecting Jaron Holmes out of Dayton. This one seems pretty simple. Apparently, Jaron Holmes canceled his draft workouts for all teams not named the Nuggets because they promised if he was there at 28, they're going to take him. In my mock, he's there, they're going to take him. This guy can rebound. I really like his scoring game, and at Dayton, a school that obviously kind of kept him under the radar, his development was insane. I was a big fan of him at the college level. At 29, I have the Sixers in this trade down spot selecting Jalen Tyson. Tyson's an intriguing player. He can play the 1 through the 4. He's a bit of a tweener, but he really can just hoop, and I love his scoring fundamentals. Is he ever going to be a guy that lights up your team from 3? Definitely not. Is he going to be a guy that's putting up multi-10 rebound performances a season? Also probably not. But is he a guy that could give you an 8, 7, and 5 stat line in the middle of January? Yeah, probably. This guy is just one of those guys that you know is going to stick around on an NBA roster. He's talented, and considering that the Sixers in the past played guys like Matisse Thybulle with absolutely no offense, just based on the fact that he was a twitchy, energetic defender, I think they're going to love Jalen Tyson. At number 30, I have the Boston Celtics selecting Bobby Klintman with the last pick in this mock draft. Klintman is an incredible athlete. He's a big forward who is actually learning how to shoot the three pretty well. That's developed quite a bit, and he knows how to crash the boards as well. The Celtics obviously just won the chip. They don't need guys that are going to be competing right away, but if Clement can develop, continue to work on that three-point shot, having a 6'10 forward who can do both of the most important things in basketball, especially in the modern day, being getting boards and making your threes, he's going to be a really fun developmental piece if he ever does crack the rotation. With all that being said, that is my final mock draft of the 2024 year. I want to give you guys a sincere thank you for being with us throughout this process. Admittedly, this video might not do the best considering it's coming out on the day of the draft or the night before. I understand that. But you guys showed incredible love throughout the whole process. Every mock draft, every big board, every little video we put up about a prospect, you guys made sure to show love, and I appreciate that to the fullest extent. So enough of the sappy stuff, guys. I really hope you guys enjoy your draft day. I hope your team picks the player that you desire, and if I mocked you guys someone that you can't stand, please let me know in the comments. Again, appreciate you guys. Make sure to check out our other videos. This was Colin from Next Man Up. We'll see you in the next one.